Hi, my name is Erika, I'm a knitter from Brazil, and you are watching every vintage pattern I knitted and crocheted ever. So, I'm very interested in vintage knitting. I became interested in vintage knitting not because I already liked vintage fashion. I honestly, before starting to knit, I never paid attention to vintage fashion. However, when I started to search projects with the characteristics I liked, like for example negative ease, waist shaping, and other elements, what popped up for me were mostly patterns from the 40s and the 50s. So I started to explore this niche, and as I am already a person which is very interested in history in general, it was fascinating for me to learn about the history of knitting and to see the creations and to understand how the fashions evolved, how the constructions evolved. And well, I started to then collect vintage knitting patterns, both those that are available for free all over the internet or were exchanged by people who own them. Mostly they are in public domain now. And I wanted to learn about the history of vintage knitting in my country. So I started to research Brazilian newspapers, search for knitting in general, but a lot of knitting patterns appeared, crochet patterns as well. And then I started also to find out the names of the books that were released and search for them in second-hand bookstores and bought some. Today is not the day in which I will show you my vintage knitting collection, but I might post a short to tease you about it. I want to make another video dedicated to that. Today I will show you another thing. I will show you what I already produced based on vintage patterns, both knitting and crochet. So let's start. My first object of this video will be the one that I am wearing. You'll see here. I called it my Cleopatra top. The pattern was named Egyptian halter top, but I don't know where it came from because the sources that I could find in the internet, mostly Etsy, only showed the picture and the name, and the pattern only contained the instructions to crochet that. It seems to me that it was taken out of a sentence magazine, because when you see the original pattern, which I will post here, you might see that it's very 70s. Well, this pattern was so interesting for me because I didn't like it how it is presented here. But as soon as I saw it, I thought this would be so nice in black and golden, and I want to make it. And I think 1 year went by, or at least some months, and then it turned out I had black and golden in my stash, leftover from other projects, and I went and I saw maybe this is the right thickness, and it was. So I decided in the beginning of last year, when I was in a kick-off knitting and crocheting summer tops, because it was very hot as it is now, I decided I was going to crochet this one. It was a doozy, because for starters, I'm not a super proficient crocheter. I have crocheted, I don't know, less than 10 things in my entire life, whereas I have knitted almost 70. So you can see a big difference in experience. Anyway, I like a project. I think, well, why not? I will be able to do it someday. Why not attempt now? And that's what I did. It was very new because this entire yoke is made with crochet intarsia. It's not, I don't know the name of this technique in English, but I know that in Portuguese, most color work is done with, they call it fio conduzido, which is you change the color, but you just crochet over the top of the other color when you want to change the colors, and the thread is inside of it. A little similar to what would be stranded color work in knitting, a little, not exactly the same. But here it wouldn't work like that, because you can see there are these chain spaces and the other color couldn't just cross it. So that's why I needed to make it in intarsia. And every one of these little bits, the black and the golden, are knitted from a separate piece of yarn attached to a bobbin or tied in a butterfly. I will show you a picture of how it was during the process of crocheting this. But it didn't even took me that long, because crochet is quicker than knitting. I used a 3.5 meter hook. My gauge was 5 stitches per 1 inch, so 20 stitches per 10 centimeters. And the yarns I used were, the golden one is Círculo, Encanto Slim, 100% viscose, And the black one was EuroRoma Passione. It is 85% cotton, 15% recycled fibers. Both were leftovers from a banner, which I have shown in other videos. I will talk about I knitted in 2023. I used a little over 400 meters, less than one skein of each. It will, of course, vary according to your size. The pattern comes in two sizes, 2 or 3. I made the smallest one, but I should have made the largest one considering my tight gauge. My gauge is a little tight in knitting and it is a lot, so tight in crochet. So I had to crochet a lot of extra rounds to get to the same measurement that the pattern announces. And there was a problem in width, I will show you in the back. I kind of fixed it, but I didn't fix it completely. You can see it's a little bit pulled. You can see it here. It ended with the black, and I made some short rows to close it here with the golden, and then I made the closure that they talked about, which was this button band, and added the buttons. I bought some buttons black and white to match the blouse, and I named it my Cleopatra blouse because it was definitely inspired by Cleopatra. Not that I have seen any images of her or movies with her wearing black, but well, I think it's nice. The pattern uses US crochet terms and it's available on Etsy, but I think it's not public domain. Maybe that's why the seller does not identify the source. I started it February 19 last year and I finished it March 8, so it took me entirely 19 days. I started in one weekend. I only took it again the next weekend because during the week I couldn't find time to work on such a time-consuming project. It took me maybe 2 entire weekends to finish this, and then it took me a little more to finish the body part. If you are going to crochet that, there is a mistake in the last row of the yoke. They give a wrong number. It took me 2-3 attempts to get to the right one, and I have took note of it in my Ravel notebook. So I will leave the link below and you can check. I also added elastic thread to the waistband here in some of these rows and here too. No, this under the arm to prevent the stretching, because I had knitted one top, the Hedwig tank by Fable Knitwear, and after some washes it was completely stretched. It was 100% cotton, and this, although it's not 100% cotton, all the fibers here are the same nature in which they are not elastic. They will not stretch and come back. They don't have memory like wool. And then I use the elastic to prevent it losing its shape. It has held until now. You can see that this top is almost 1 year old. And I don't use it very often because you can see it's kind of with all this golden, kind of a fancy top. But I have used it a few times and washed it, and it's okay. In blocking, this transformed marvelously. Blocking makes a lot of effect over viscose. So this became super drapey and super pretty. Well, it took me almost half a year to tackle another vintage pattern. By the way, not even a vintage pattern, it's more like an antique pattern because it's from 1847. I will show you here. It's a little weird thing, right? But, well, how I learned about this one. I am in a few Facebook groups about knitting, and one of them is named Historic Knitting. And, well, there is this lady, she made one of these and posted about it in the group. It's made with worsted weight, which is, if you know something about Victorian knitting, it's pretty rare. There are some you can find. I think I have others here which are in worsted weight. Most of vintage or antique knitting is knitted in very thin needles, but you can find some outliers like this in the Victorian times, in the 30s, and then in the 50s and on. So this one, she posted it, and I had very little left over from a vest that I self-drafted. I will talk about it in my video about the knits from last year. And it was a degraded yarn which went from pink to white, and I had the almost white end of it. She posted her version, and she posted the pattern, which was very short, very simple, and there was a link to the book, which is available in public domain. I downloaded the book, I went to the page, and I picked up my needles and my yarn, and I tried, and I knitted it in one day, overnight, from August 27 to August 28 last year. What is this? This is a ruff for the neck. It's meant to go like this. Meant to go like this in your neck and warm up your neck. If you look for 1840s fashion, you will see that it was very demure. That pattern is not really a pattern. There are instructions to cast on a number of stitches and follow the instructions. There are sizes. There isn't much talk. It's a very brief pattern, as anything in the Victorian books. There is engage, of course. I might have cast on a little more of this, because then it will be able to close around my neck. It almost closes, but doesn't quite close. Still, it's very cute. I can pull it in, and I actually worn it at home. When I finished it, I worn it a few times. You can see here. It's kind of cute. It's like a Victorian Sophie scarf. You have it here. You just may leave your neck warm over a turtleneck or something. Of course, I don't think I would live for the streets like that, or walk like that. But at home, I worn quite a lot in the winter. It warms up us, and it's cute. Actually, maybe if some cool girl starts wearing it, it might come back to fashion. Well, the interesting thing about this one is how it's knitted. You can see it has like two thicknesses. It's double folded here. See, we cast on a number of stitches. I don't remember, maybe 50 here, and we work a number of rows in garter stitch in the larger needles, which are 6.5 millimeters. Then we knit together the tip of it with the end of this rows that we are knitting. We knitted them together here. We form this join, you can see here, and then we start knitting with 3 needles to form this part in here. We need a little bit of garter, and then we need some 1 or 2 rows with eyelets to thread this ribbon through, and then we mirror the same thing. We knit some rows with the bigger needles, fold and knit them together, seam them here, and then we thread the ribbon here, a thin ribbon. I got one of the ones I had at home. I had bought it to crochet chokers, but I haven't yet crocheted one choker, so I got this and used it for this. And it was a very nice experience. It was quick gratification. It was intriguing to see the thing appear, see the thing form up. I released a call for it in my Instagram and in my group. I have a group about vintage knit at WWII, and I think one other person joined it, knitted for their cat. The cat is super cute. That if you look for this pattern, you will see the picture of the cat. Cute as heck. And I finished it and I archived it because, well, I worn it a little bit, but I archived it then because the interesting part for me here was to understand how it worked and to knit something so old. Because, I mean, 1847, almost, well, 180 years old. Well, next one then. Well, I liked the ruff for the neck so much that I started to go through my Victorian manuals, all ebooks that I found online, and read the receipts. They called them receipts, not properly patterns. And there was this one that called my attention because it seemed easy. It used 2 colors, and it also was for a ruff, which will then transform into a cap. I will show you now. This is the one here. It will be a ruff like that when it's closed like a convertible car. See, like that. Close it, you know, close it. It is a ruff for the neck. Mine is a little bit loose, I'd say. It could be tighter. When I tried to wear it like that, I wore it like to the side. You see here, close it. You can leave it almost totally blue, but see, opens like the top of a card, you know, like that. How it is done, the construction, once again, super interesting. That's why I like to knit these Victorian patterns, because they had very ingenious ideas. It's just stockinette and reverse stockinette, alternating. And they create, you know how when you knit ribbon, one column, the column of knits appears in the front, the column of purls recedes. It's the same here, it's the same principle. Now here, the purls advanced, you see, to the front, you know, they form this rounded curve, and the knits receded. And then when they are all together, it closes on its own by itself. As a cap, it was worn in the head like that. Of course, not with loose hair, but on top of their very, very Victorian hairstyles. Tall hairstyles with the curls under here and closed here like that. You can see what this was used for. I have researched a little bit. You can find this model of cap with about 3 names. Here it's named Prudence Cap. It also appears in the Goddess magazine as Opera Hood, and that's what gave me the clue of how it was used. And there are also some similar receipts that call it cephalin. The Opera Hood, that is what I found in my research, and I will leave a link to the article I found below. And apparently you had dressing etiquette to go to the opera. You had an etiquette to go to the theater, but to the theater you could go with more simple clothes, a bonnet and normal dress. To the opera, however, you had to be full gala. I don't know why. I think they are presented in the same place. The same audiences were going to watch it, but you had to go in an evening dress of opera capelet and opera hood. They might be something like this, maybe knitted in fancy wool, fancy silk, or they could be a lace scarf and many other kinds of things. You will see in the link below one that is kind of similar to this one, but it's bigger. It goes farther. The other use for this cephalins and all was to warm up the head when someone was traveling in a carriage and they wear it under their bonnet. The bonnet was, I don't know, straw and wouldn't warm the head so much if the person was in the winter. Then they could add a layer of this one and decoration here and so on. I knitted it in the colors advised in the book, which are white and blue. This pattern was already modernized by the magazine Piecework, and the version of Piecework has it in white and light blue. A very, very pretty one. I only used it for reference for tying this one. I used their picture for a reference to create this ribbon, this part of the ribbon here, to fold it like that. And there was also some other person who had knitted it in dark blue, and I picked the dark blue because of that. And because I had this yarn, remember when I said I didn't start to knit the Hobbiton Junior vest for the little boy because I didn't have a color? Well, I had picked this blue for him actually, but I really wanted to knit this, and I picked the yarn and knitted this, and I was then without a color to knit for him. And also I didn't want to knit for him in blue because I think he suits muddy green very much. I think he's a little soft autumn. Well, I think we can move on to the next one now. That one took me 3 weeks to finish. I started it in the end of August 29, and I finished it in September 21. In this meanwhile, I had personal problems. Also, I knitted the entire thing very early, but I stopped the process for a long time until I found a proper ribbon with the color I wanted to finish the project itself. Now we are going to talk about the actual first vintage that I started to knit, because this one was the first vintage item that I finished. Crochet, not knit, but I had started before in January last year a vest from a vintage leaflet which is available for free at archive.org. It's Bestway 1021 ATS pullover with or without sleeves. And I knitted this for a long while. It took me 9 months to finish. You see, not much of a troublesome knit, not much of complex knit. The thing is, it was like my sock knitting, you know? It was the knit that I will take to waiting rooms, to travel. I will knit this out of home, while the other things I would knit at home. This was very rarely picked. That's why it took so long. And it's, to be honest, it's a little bit of a tedious process because it's entire broken rib. It was pretty portable because as a vintage knit, it's knitted flat in panels, bottom up. Here you knit a long ribbon and then you increase according to instructions until kind of here, and then you knit flat a little bit and you start to decrease. In the back you decrease just for the armholes and then you knit flat until here and cast on in stair step bind off here and here. And in the front you also start to make the neck here. Yeah, you decrease here and then here. Well, it's not mine anymore. I started knitting it for me, but in the end I looked at it and my sister dressed it and it suits her more than it suits me. It doesn't look bad in me, but it looks better in her. I might change to show you how it is in me. And the color suits her very much because she's an autumn and she looks beautiful in it. Well, I will then maybe show you how I look with it and tell you about the technical details and a little bit about what is the ATS for which this pattern was released. So here you have it. See, a bit here. It has this little blousy effect because of the ribbon. I like it. I will steal it from her sometimes to wear, but anyway, I think I did a pretty job here with the pickup. Kind of a nice job with the seaming, but it's not invisible at all. I wish I had made the decreases one stitch away from the selvage, because that's the best way to make them, because then you will have a clean selvage to seam. Here I didn't. I did the increase actually right in the selvage. And for the pickup, I did not follow the rate the pattern because I had already watched another YouTuber, Mean Walden. Sorry if I didn't say her name right. I will place her channel here. She made another Bestway pattern and she had trouble with the armholes because it was too flimsy. It was too open, too gaping. So I thought, well, I won't risk. I will just cup in a sensible rate according to instructions, trustworthy instructions from my guide, Roxanne Richardson. And so I did. I picked up 96 stitches, whereas the pattern said to you, pick up 176. So much, almost double. Imagine how it will be with 176. I think the armhole will be in the waist. And I don't know even how it would be possible because I picked up 2 of every 3 stitches. So how 176? Well, here I picked up a little closer to what the pattern said, but I also didn't pick up exactly that. I followed also the same rating from the... And I think it turned out nice. Maybe it pulls a little bit here, but not so much. It's pretty smooth. I love the texture, to be honest. I think this pattern, could you say it is a pattern from 1940? If maybe it wasn't the waist shaping, because today the patterns normally would be more like a rectangle, the vest patterns. This is very close to the Friday vest by Pic-nic. V-neck, of course. Pic-nic is top down in the round, so in terms of construction it might be more comfortable, but it's basically the same thing. So if you want a free alternative, you can also just skip the waist shaping. Of course, if you don't mind knitting bottom up, flat and seaming. Well, it was knitted in 2.5 for the ribbons, all of them, and 3mm for the body. The pattern said to use 3 7/5, but the pattern doesn't give a gauge. So what I did, the pattern wasn't at Ravelry at the time. I logged it there. You can log in patterns to Ravelry as a voluntary editor, and I searched for someone in the project part who had knitted. I searched by the name of the leaflet, and I found a lady and I addressed her. I sent her a private message asking which gauge had she gotten, and she measured for me, and I saw that the needles, the recommended needles, gave us a pretty big gauge. Substantial positive is for a vintage pattern. Of course, it was meant to be worn over at least one shirt, so maybe that's the reason, but the measurements that it was recommended for were a little under the finished garment measurements. So I went down a needle size, which is pretty rare for me, but I did, and I think I like it. I am much more satisfied with this result. Of course, I did gauge swatch. My gauge turned out being 27 stitches and 47 rows in 10 centimeters. Now there are at least 5 or 6 projects on Ravelry in which you can base yourself to find gauge information, any other observation which is useful for you to knit your own. I really recommend. This is a beautiful pattern. I don't know if I would knit it again because, as I said, it was tedious. It took me 9 months, but if I would, I probably would pick another color, but well, I like this one. I also said I was going to talk to you a little bit about what is the ATS, for whom this pattern was created. The ATS were the British Auxiliary Terrestrial Services. It was a voluntary force of women which was created in 1938, joined the war with Hitler. And at first, these ladies worked as cooks, clerks, shopkeepers to support the war effort. Later on, when the men started to be sent to the battlefields, as women weren't allowed in the battlefields, they started to fulfill other jobs within the army that were until then fulfilled by men, like operating radars, operating anti-aircraft weapons, and a lot of other important defense forces. So this was for the military ladies. Shout out for them. Thanks to them also, we are free today. Well, as it was meant to be a uniform, they had specific colors. Each weapon had their colors. Others had navy blue, black, but this force had khaki, which actually was a kind of a military green, not far from this one. I thought I had mistaken the choice, and I ended up creating something a little more historically faithful than I believe it. Although not so much, because this isn't wool, this is 100% acrylic. I got this yarn left over from a vest I knitted for my grandma in 2023, of which I will talk about later. And I decided to knit this vest precisely because it fell within the meterage I had, the leftover, and also the thickness of the yarn, because vintage patterns often are light fingering. In this yarn is light finger. The next pattern I knitted was also from the 40s, and it was my first ever stranded colorwork pattern. And it was a little bit tricky because, well, I don't start easy, and it was colorwork flat. If you know, you know. You must do this part, trap the colorwork, trap the strands from the front. When you are making the purl, you have to know how to knit and purl in colorwork. This is a Dutch bonnet, also from Bestway 1796. And this leaflet contains two bonnets. One is this Fair Eye one, and the other has a checker board pattern right here and not on the top. They use the same instructions but use different charts and have different colors recommended for them. This one is worn like that. You see, I made a lot of vintage hats, a lot of hats in general last year, because I think they are nice to learn about construction. They're quick projects, they give us quick satisfaction and teach us a lot. Here, the other had ribbon. This one, we could use ribbon too, but this one they teach us how to knit. This is one by one ribbon. And actually, I think 1x1 ribbon makes for better straps than stockinette, maybe. Very 40s. Of course, they also wouldn't have long hair. They would have hair about here, and maybe look cuter than me here now. But here you have it. I don't like very much when the hats sit too close to my head. I feel like I have the head shaped a little bit like an egg, and I don't like it so much. But I like it a little bit looser. If I leave it a little bit looser, it's kind of cute. Here, well, you can see it here. It's folded. I will explain the construction. The pattern, I think this isn't free. I found it in a group in Facebook in which people share vintage patterns. It's in public domain though, and you can find it probably on Etsy or other sites. I will place a link below if I find one. You start by knitting this one. It's the first thing you knit, the colorwork part. So funny. It sent me on a search for stranded colorwork, a crazy search. I have added a lot of patterns to my queue, but my queue isn't to be taken seriously, honestly. It's more like curated favorites. So here, it's a very classic pattern. If you saw my previous videos, you may recognize this yarn as the one in which I knitted the vest for my cousin, the Judith Robiton vest, the white ones. I knitted so many things with this one. I bought it to knit my Noel blouse to be the third color in it, and I ended up using it in this other hat here, the Victorian one. And then the leftovers, I used it here, and I used it in my plotted Triceratops too. Then my cat got the very last bit. It was less than 1 gram, I think. But you see, and the blue was also from there. I still have a little bit of this blue. I love the color. Isn't it such a beautiful blue? The yarn is very soft too. Also acrylic here. Everything is acrylic. This one has nylon too. So it's not historic accurate, because in the 40s they would sell wool here, but they don't very much anymore. They do sell it, but it's only one brand and very expensive. Only merino, I found out there is a 100% worsted weight wool, which I haven't tested yet. I plan on doing it when I can buy yarn again. Well then, you start with the colorwork piece, flat as I said. I think I did a decent job for my first try. Not perfect, of course, but nice. Trapping the colorwork. Then you continue with the blue. You knit a little bit in the same direction. You make a purl row because you will then fold this. It will be folded backwards. So, and then you keep knitting here in the other side. This is the right side. You keep knitting then, stockinette here, and shaping it with short rows. Then you finish cast off. You knit this one separated. I don't know if it's knitted with short rows too, or just decreases in the sides. And you connect the two with 3 or 4 rows of single crochets all around and all around the borders too, which is very important because the crochet is what gives. If you were to seam, it wouldn't have this shape that kind of stands on its own. My yarn is very soft and flimsy. I think rustic yarn would be better for this project, but without the crochet it wouldn't have the structure. The crochet here gives the structure, and that's why I like to knit the old things. We learn details, we learn why people do some things, why people pick this over that seam, and so on. You know, you may see from another project that I will show that people just assume that if you know knitting, you know crochet. If you know crochet, you know knitting. You know everything. You know seaming too. I don't know if people were just that knowledgeable back in the day, but you know, I think it isn't bad if we do it today. If we adopt the same practices, why not do all the things? Well, that was it. I finished it in 2 weeks. I started October 1st. I finished it in October 15th. I used 3.25 meter needles and 2.25 DPNs to knit this because it's much easier to knit such a thin strap in DPN. And even though my gauge was bigger than the one in the pattern, I got 28 stitches in 40 rows equal 10 centimeters. I think this is not deep enough. I think it could be knitted a little longer. It would be better. Maybe people in the 40s had small heads. I know I don't have a super big head, but you know, maybe compared to the ladies in the 40s. Well, next project. For my next project, I went back in time again to the Victorian era. 1890s is the Victorian era, I think it is. Queen Victoria was still alive. And I knitted this one. What is this one? You will ask me. This one is a bolero. I don't have now the brush for it to close it properly, but I will show some footage here of me wearing it with different outfits because this is surprisingly versatile. I watched the video from Zoe Arnold in which she was knitting this thing. This is a Hug Me Tight, it's the name of this pattern, also known as Emigrant Vest, also known as Zouave Jacket. It's a type of pattern that existed in the Victorian era. They advise you to use it either at home or in the street under a shawl, like a layer close to the body. Very close actually, because they use the stretchiness of garter stitch to build the garment and to keep you warm. It's practical because your arms will be free to make chores. I watched her video, she knit one of these, and I immediately wanted to knit one too. I had this leftover yarn from my 1703 sweater, about which I talked in my test knit video. I had only one skein and a little bit left over, and it was enough to make this. Almost. The crochet border is another yarn. I bought this other yarn because I didn't have other white ones. They say you can make the border in the same color or contrasting. I didn't like it in contrasting color, so I bought another white yarn. Now I have more, but it's not the same yarn. I think this was the most knit garter stitch I ever knitted. Not so much maybe now, but it was so smooth when I was knitting it. What seduced me to this pattern was, again, worsted weight. My one is bulky weight, but I have talked to you about this yarn. It's named bulky, but I get worsted gauge with it every time. So you measure your chest, you get not the entire bust circumference, but then from armhole to armhole, you get half of this measurement, like say from this to this, and this will be your width. And then the length of your piece, of your garter rectangle, will be twice your measurement, your entire measurement from here to here. To be honest, they are very precise. I wasn't precise. I I said I will make border stitches, which I end up forgetting, which was better because I would have to seam. And if we make a slip stitch edge, it isn't so good to seam. It gets gapy. So I forgot it was for the best, but I ended up adding like 3 stitches more of what my measurements said me to do. So I got 1 centimeter more, and it already wasn't right in the shoulders how the drawing of the book is. Right, you need a rectangle, then you pick the 2 tips of your rectangle and you join it like a cow here, right in the middle. You can join it here, and then you fold it in half, right, like a cow, and you need here in the top of the folded fabric, you will want your seaming to be right in the middle, right in the center, and then you will seam here, and you will leave some space in the 2 sides, enough for your arms. Then how you dress it. This, the seaming which joined your 2 sides, must be across your back. And this, the other seaming, must be across your shoulder. And the top part will be kind of folded and form a little bit of a collar here. I'll show you. I'm losing the light here. I may have to rush here. See? The way I am here is not super great, but I will place pictures and B-roll so you can see it better. I think it looks very much like a 50s bolero. They had very similar shapes to that, and even similar constructions. In the 50s, they used it to make some original constructions, and well, this was the one I've worn one time, because this was my last finished object of 2024, so it was already hot when I finished it. Bulky weight, 5 mere needles all over, 3.5 hook for the borders. The edging took me some experimentation, because at first I wanted to make simple single crochet, but it would make it stiff at the border, and this can't be stiff because you depend on it stretching to accommodate your body. So I tried some different edges until I got to this one, which I took notes of it. You can see it in my project page, and it fits the project perfectly. I will write down my step-by-step version of it with much more explanation than the original pattern, and I will make it available at WWII for a price, but actually for free. I will make those codes in which you can pay what you want, like $1, half of it, or nothing, and download this, and with more instructions to make it your own, because I saw some people had trouble understanding. The original instructions are like a paragraph, so I understand, but I will make it available, and when I post this you can check if I already did it. If I already have it available, I will post a link below, and if I don't, I will post a link below when I do it. And let's go to our final project. It's another vest. Here, colorwork one this time. Am I a vest girly? I think I am, but it's more like by accident, because I normally buy too little yarn, then I have to make vests instead of sweaters. But to be honest, this one I had enough of these yarns, but I ended up knitting this because I saw the pattern and I was interested, and I got perfect gauge, perfect, like stitch gauge, row gauge. It never happened before in my life. I just made a gauge swatch for experiment and ended up knitting it. It's very similar in colors even to the pattern. You can see it here. I think hers is a little bit more warm toned. Mine is kind of a natural color, cool beige. I don't like beige very much, but with black you can do it. It's a pattern from my book. It's one of the books I want to show you. This one is from the 70s, so we are back to the 70s. We started with a 70s top and we ended up with this one, also 70s. I think this is translated from German. This pattern is available on Etsy too in English. I don't know from which magazine, but apparently this German company released books and magazines and everybody translated them. I saw patterns from this company that is mentioned here in Italian, in English, in Portuguese. I love this book. I have more magazines than books, and some of the books I have, some of the books released in Brazil are just stitch dictionaries. This is one of the few that isn't. You can see I have a lot of marks here because I want to knit almost all of these. And it has a nice approach in which they teach you basic techniques, all techniques like cables, lace, knitting with different fibers, cotton, mohair, wool, different thicknesses, fingering weight, bulky weight, for adults, for kids, for women, for men. You have everything here. And you have it by practice. They are not teaching you a lesson about the technique. They will present you with a pattern and then they will show you in the back how to make the technique applied in that pattern. For example, here you have this pattern knitted sideways, right? They have here how to change the colors and create the stripes there. In the one that I made had mosaic. It's mosaic with a little twist, because one of the stitches here you made by knitting in the row below. Here you can see you have the pattern here, but there is a mistake in this book. The instructions they give for the base stitch are to make this, but this we actually only use here and here. In the rest, we will make this one, if we are to believe in the sample picture. So there is just one thing. They say to knit one row in beige, you have to knit it in black, actually. I think I will make a note of it in my pattern. Here, the instructions, I said. They gave you a pattern to practice. So it's very nice. If you knit this from back to back, you finish this book as an intermediary knitter. Of course, this is also a vintage pattern, so they have only 2 sizes. But it's pretty simple to size up because it's a super simple repeat. It's 4 stitches and 6 rows, the repeat. And the instructions about the decreases, they give you a rate, but here, for example, they don't teach you how to slope, where to place your decreases, which decrease to choose. You are on your own. This is much like the vintage spirit. You are on your own, but it's nice because it gives freedom too. You can substitute your preferred techniques for what they give you there. These are not written. These are double folded. You can see it here. I kind of like it more with the beige instead of the colorway, but my mom and another lady from a group I'm in, they like it with this. They say it ties the thing together. I think it does. I picked it up again according to Roxanne Richardson's rating and not according to the pattern instructions, because the pattern instructions appear to have too much stitches, too many. Here, in fact, you can see, right? It's loose, pretty loose. I don't like it very much, but for the arm of a shirt to go through, it's good. If I want to wear a larger shirt with balloon sleeves, it will be fine. Here, I think I should have tried to pick up the amount of stitches they say, because you can see it's pulling up, it's pulling in a little bit here. Very little, but it's pulling up here. And I don't like very much. I think it's better as in the model in which nothing is pulling up. It's pretty smooth. And maybe if I had picked up the stitches recommended, it would be like that too. But it's details. I think it's a very classy vest for such a simple pattern. So I do recommend everything that I showed today. I recommend that. They are all nice experiences. They are pretty good finished objects, even if some of them are quite not practical, but they are very interesting to learn, and they are good practice for working with vintage patterns if you have interest, working with antique patterns and learning how to decipher them, how to find your way through them. This one has gauge. 70s is a little bit easier to knit than 40s, but many 40s and 50s patterns, 30s patterns even have gauge. Well, I'm losing my voice already. I'm losing the light already, so I will close it here. I hope I don't have that much footage to edit, but I hope to post this for you soon enough. I wonder if you would like to knit one of these or crochet, and I wonder what are your experience if you have some vintage knitting, vintage patterns from the Victorian times up to, I don't know, the 90s. Be free to comment about it. Be free to recommend me patterns, because I'm always after vintage patterns. I really like to read them, to watch them, to examine them, even when I'm not going to knit them. If you use Ravelry at all, let me invite you to enter the group, the Vintage Database, because I created this group to reunite data on vintage knitting, mostly to log the vintage patterns that are all scattered into Ravelry, to improve the data of the existing patterns, edit them to add the details that aren't there but are available in the pattern, to add pictures and all. So if you want to take part in it, or if you want just to know vintage patterns, because the group has a lot of bundles that reunite patterns that are scattered all over the internet, and you can find, oh, this blog has these patterns, this blog has these other patterns, as long as these patterns are on Ravelry, because most of the vintage patterns are not on Ravelry, and that's why I created the group, the Vintage Database, because I think it will be useful. If we have this data, it will be useful for knitters, it will be useful for professors, for researchers, and everyone. So that's it. Have a good week ahead, good knitting. If you are going to knit this week or crochet, I hope you do it as much as you want. And be happy, be healthy, and until the next one. Bye bye.